the Evolution Security Podcast. Welcome to the Evolution Security Podcast, where we give you the knowledge and live training to protect yourself, your family, and your country. This episode is brought to you in part by Tenacor. Tenacor is an American design, development, manufacturing, and training company building products that work. They are innovators that come from a law enforcement and training background with years of experience. We would specifically suggest that you look at the new Velo 4 AWIB holster. Everyone on this podcast owns one and uses it regularly. For 10% off your purchase, use the code EvoSec at checkout. That's EVOSEC at checkout for 10% off. Lastly, if you like what you hear here, please give us a review. It really helps to keep up our ratings and get the word out to others. You can find us online on Instagram at EvoSec USA and Facebook, also EvoSec USA, or visit our website, evosec.org. That's evosec.org, where you can find bios of the staff and links to upcoming events and trainings. Now for the show. Hey everyone, welcome to the show this week. I'm here with Eric and Aaron as usual. How you doing, guys?
Doing great, brother.
Yeah, doing wonderful.
Nice.
Glad to be here. Always
a pleasure to sit down and do this with you guys. So, I know that we all get after it and we all pursue this path, but we've got a guest this week that kind of has taken this to another level, the way that he works his stuff. I'll just go ahead and read you a little bio on him. William Aprill is a licensed mental health professional with over 15 years' experience across the continuum of care. He presently maintains a private practice and consultancy specializing in post-traumatic interventions and other disciplines. William is a former deputy sheriff and Special Deputy US Marshal. He is a decorated competitive shooter and has taught civilian law enforcement and military personnel in various fighting skills since 1990. William maintains an active schedule both as a student and teacher, having been instructor-rated by several top-tier trainers and studying under many of the most influential members of the combative arts community. Under the auspices of Aprill Risk Consulting, William has presented his material on violent criminals and their decision-making, defensive incident aftermath, mindset development, and defensive preparedness locally and nationally, including at the annual conference of the International Association of Law Enforcement Firearms Instructors. He's got a lot of other credentials here too, and I could go on, but I think it might be better if we just get into the interview with him. What do you guys think?
I'm good with that.
Sounds good to me. Looking forward to it.
All right. Well, with no more waiting, here's our interview with Mr. William Aprill. Hey, welcome back, everybody. Brian here with Eric and Aaron, and of course, we have a wonderful guest, William Aprill of Aprill Risk Consulting. Very happy that he took some time to come to our show today, and even if not properly referenced every time, we do quote you on a regular basis. So we appreciate having you here, and I believe that's going to be pretty cool because I think this is going to be a great show. You're someone that we've really wanted to have on for a while. So welcome, William.
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
So might as well start out with the basics. As some of our audience may not know, you own and operate Aprill Risk Consulting, but if you want to give us a little background, just give us a synopsis of how you came to be where you are and, just who you are a little bit.
Sure. Well, I guess the short version is that I'm a consultant and a trainer, but I got into this end of things sort of the long way around the barn. I'm a mid-career mental health professional by trade, but that's gradually become my side job as I've gotten more and more into training and consulting. I've been working in mental health for 23 years now. And I started out. I got into behavioral health sort of through the back door. I went away to college, and 3 years into college, got kicked out. Too much Guinness, not enough mattress is how I describe it. And when I came home, having been kicked out of college, I needed a job, and a relative got me on at the sheriff's office, my local sheriff's office in New Orleans. And I was a regular old sheriff's deputy working in corrections and court security and patrol. And then I worked for the U.S. Marshal Service for a while as a Special Deputy US Marshal. And when I got my act together and grew up a little bit, I decided to go back to school because I kind of got the feeling that law enforcement wasn't going to be a good career for me. I went back to school and finished up and moved into, after graduate school and fellowship training and postgraduate training, my first job in mental health was in addictions, just sort of by accident. And I found myself super comfortable working in addictions because I was already very familiar with working with a lot of criminal offenders from being in the jail all the time. And when you work in addictions, you're involved with the courts all the time. And I just found that I rather liked talking to criminals. So it was sort of always a thread in my career, even though my clinical work now is exclusively private practice. I deal with mostly, I'd say about a third folks still with addiction-related disorders, about a third folks with post-traumatic stress disorder, and then the rest is a general mental health practice. But I do a fair bit, and always have done a fair bit, of consulting on criminal cases. And because of that, I get to interview a whole lot of violent offenders. And that was just something that always intrigued me and I really enjoyed. And so it sort of led me to get to the point where I had something to say about it, and started getting asked to be an invited speaker at conferences, mostly law enforcement conferences and things like that. And and it's kind of a great combination of accidents that's led me here. But the way I sum it up is during the week I see patients, and on the weekends I'm teaching.
Nice. Very good. That's a large body of work. It's funny that you say mid-career and you've been in the mental health industry for 23 years. So that's the entire breadth of a lot of people's careers. So,
well, geez, I hope I'm not going to drop dead, anytime
right.
next week or two. So I'll get at least another solid 20 years out of it. That would be good.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's a large body of work. Now, did your years in law enforcement and dealing with, criminals, how did you really feel that you wanted away from that, or was it just that you found the right opportunity to transition?
Well, I realized the biggest thing was I realized I had wasted 3 years of college. I frankly should have taken some time off after high school and worked, but that kind of wasn't what my sort of social group of folks would do. And so I plunged right into a really demanding sort of small Ivy college, and that was just a bad choice. And so after working for a while, I realized I was ready to go back to school, and I hadn't really approached it with the right frame of mind the first time around. And it was really, at that point, I had kind of a real intrinsic desire to do it right. To really learn. And I had become more and more interested in kind of the inner workings of people. Some pretty strong role models of mine were psychiatrists and psychologists, and so led me, of course, in that direction. But when I first started working in the jail, I was just a kid. I don't know how old I was after 3 years of college. I suppose I was 21 or 22. And it was, my first exposure to criminals, and certainly to concentrated criminality. And it was a real eye-opener. And not just the brutality and all that sort of stuff that you'll see in a maximum security prison, but the boredom. Frankly, it's unbelievably boring, more than anything else. And I found out that inmates are bored too, and they'll talk if you talk, and they'll talk if you listen. And frankly, they had something to say. Sometimes they tell the truth, and the things they say were really interesting. And it sort of planted this bug in my ear that, that a lot of the things that I thought, and I think things that are generally thought in the public consciousness about criminals, and especially how they think, are just really, really wrong. And it started a fire that kind of didn't really get, become my primary interest until I'd say the past 10 years or so. But it was a fire that never went out, and it's something that really interests me even to this day.
Well, hey, William, I'm Aaron here. Just kind of going on to a little bit of your career and training here. About 3 years ago, I took the course that you offer with Tom Givens and Craig Douglas, the Establishing Dominance Paradigm. Like I said, I think I took it about 3 years ago here in Oklahoma. And I was the guy that shot Craig Douglas dead, even though he was a cop. One of those.
In your defense, he's a pretty sketchy cop.
But long story short, there was definitely some audio occlusion and visual distortions there going on. But hey, good time. Good thing it was in training there.
Yeah, and that course is not to give away the punchline, but that course is one where we go out of our way to really put people under as close to as we can get to real world stress. And you're not the first person to have a real awakening. I mean, people have said, wow, I had heard about auditory exclusion, or I had heard about tunnel vision, or I had heard about loss of fine motor control, but they didn't really believe in it. I mean, they sort of believed in it, but more in the abstract than anything else. And especially when we're doing video debriefs of people's own performance, we get over and over again people who not only do things that they would never do, they do things that they swore they didn't do. As a matter of fact, they're convinced, some of them, that we've had people ask us if the film was doctored, and we haven't gotten quite that advanced, so we just go with the truth. And it's amazing that all of the effects that people have heard about until they've been experienced, really, the belief in them is sort of academic. And so that's one of the things the course goes, we go out of our way to do, is provide you with a training example as close as we can get of an approximation to a real event, so that, as I always say, we don't want your first time under that kind of stress to be midnight on the corner of State and Main, right? We'd much rather do it in training where nobody's going to get killed, and we get to debrief and learn after the fact.
Sure. Now, I have to say, I mean, it really was, a lot of us are training junkies, right? So, and I'm slowly getting pretty deep into that moniker myself. But, I mean, it was definitely one of the best courses I think anyone could take. I mean, details of yours, amazing firearms instruction and, priority training from him. And then, of course, the scenario-based stuff with Craig. I mean, I highly recommend anyone to take that class if it's near them. Now, it looks like you guys are changing where you're having that. It's not going to be in Oklahoma this year, is it?
Yeah, the venue changed hands. That was really a kind of a unique venue that hosted the course, but it changed hands, and having that enormous space we sort of used as a tactical playground. The new owner had other plans for the space, and so we couldn't really continue there. But we found what we think is a great facility in Tennessee.
Oh, okay.
And we'll be there. But thank you for the kind words about the course. The thing that course is really sort of unique for is we do talk about kind of operator's manual of the brain under stress, when we're doing classroom lecture. But then the scenarios are non-consensual, right? Mm-hmm. You can lose, and that's an incredibly critical part of training, but it's the part that's logistically most difficult to put in place, but also people are afraid of it. Whether we realize it or not, a lot of training has a hidden purpose, and that purpose is to make me feel good about myself, and certainly to minimize the amount of time I spend being embarrassed. But non-consensual training is important. Training where things that you don't expect can actually happen is really important. Because there's just not that much stress in punching holes in paper. Now we can try and make it more stressful, but only in a free form environment that safely run force on force can provide. Only that is the kind of best approximation of an actual critical event.
Well, your lectures on how criminals think and select victims. I mean, I'll tell you, I love. I'm a gun guy, but the non-gun stuff was my favorite portion of that class. Your lectures were the most fascinating, and I enjoyed the heck out of them. Now, I'm kind of going to skip around a little bit here because of some important questions that I think don't get talked about a lot. Now, how much do you think mental illness plays in the lives of criminals? Or, I mean, are they suffering from mental illnesses, or do you think that a lot of people that are mentally ill become criminals? How does that shake out based on your experience in your clinical practice?
Well, there's certainly no shortage of folks that are criminals that have diagnosable mental illness. But the question I think you're really getting at, and most people get at, is how much of the crime is the result of mental illness? Mm-hmm. And that answer is very little. Very little crime is actually, though it's funny you brought it up. I actually posted today on Instagram about a case of a crime. This is an older woman in the Chicago area who repeatedly trespasses in airports and attempts to stow away on commercial aircraft. And she's been arrested at the airport over half dozen times and has actually made it all the way to the UK on a flight for which she didn't have a ticket. Now, she keeps getting arrested and she keeps getting in trouble, but she has a real compulsion to do this. Now, that's a mental illness that is whose symptom is a crime. But that's the rarest kind of crime. If you think about the relationship, the most sound relationship between mental illness and crime is that victims of chronic and persistent mentally ill are much more likely to be the victims of street crime than they are perpetrated. If you think about homeless, schizophrenics, things like that, they are brutalized on the streets. They're far more likely to be a victim than a perpetrator of criminal violence. What most folks are thinking of when they'll see, let's say, a mass shooting, like the Newtown shooting and Adam Lanza, the perpetrator, is he mentally ill? Yeah, it seems to be that case. That seems to be the case. But it's more complicated than that. He also seems to have had some neurodevelopmental disorders. But on top of that, even what's much more common in shooters like that, mass shooters especially, is a personality disorder. A personality disorder is not a mental illness. There are two different kinds of conditions that affect a person's psychology. A personality disorder is, in a sense, personality in the psychological sense is your operating system, if you will. It's the patterns of behavior that govern how you interact with the world. And it's incredibly firmly rooted in your experience of the world. If you think about it, your genetic endowment, right, things you have just inborn in you, plus your experience of the world yields your personality. Now, there may very well be vulnerabilities, and the environment in which you develop will either make them worse, make those vulnerabilities, make you prey to those vulnerabilities, or will sort of have somewhat of a protective effect. But the crime, especially of mass violence, is a crime that's much more closely associated with personality disorder than with what we call frank mental illness. I think that was an awfully long answer to your question. I hope it made some sense.
No, it made a lot of sense, William. A great answer. Now,
well, it's just really troubling because I see a lot of people in the self-protection community, sort of gun people, to use that shorthand, sounding pretty silly about mental illness, and frankly, sounding as silly about mental illness as anti-gun people sound about guns. To say, all of these problems are 100% mental illness is just frankly a misapprehension of what's going on, and it's not super duper helpful. We owe it to ourselves to be at least less silly than our kind of opponents on this big important social issue.
Well, and on a side note, I don't want to go into this too deep, but I do have to say there are some, let's say, talk show hosts that love to harp on particular individuals that do commit these mass shootings, that they are on SSRI medications, and as if that's a cause. To me, now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, there are millions and millions of people on SSRIs and other psychological modifying and drugs that help them. I mean, shouldn't we have, thousands and thousands of mass shootings because of that? If that was the cause.
And oversimplified answers, the second you look at them closely, they fall apart. Mm-hmm. I mean, every single mass shooter in U.S. history has at some point or another driven in a car. Does that mean cars cause mass shootings? I mean, no, of course not. We all know that correlation does not imply causation, unquote, unless people need to make a point. And then they're perfectly okay with correlation, causing events. The reason, the majority of school shooters, unquote, or every school shooter, unquote, you'll hear all these things sort of thrown around, has been on SSRIs, is that they're deeply troubled kids. And somebody has tried to help them, including bringing them to a physician who put them on a medication. They were deeply troubled in the first place. There is no evidence that you can take a perfectly healthy person and put them on an SSRI and they'll become a school shooter. First off, why would you put a perfectly healthy person on an SSRI? But even assuming you did, the notion that that's going to turn them into a mass killer is absurd. There is some increase, especially in adolescence, and this sort of gets everyone's ears perked up. In self-injurious behavior and in suicidal and homicidal ideation, having the thoughts. But the notion that they cause mass violence is absurd. And I wish people would just let that go. The net benefits to people taking psychiatric medications far outweigh the adverse outcomes. There are people who would be dead without SSRIs. And so, they certainly have the right to feel a little anxious that SSRIs are being kind of, vilified in this really ridiculous way. The same sort of thing has happened with video games now and again. Are violent video games bad for kids who are already troubled? Absolutely. But are they turning kids into killers who are otherwise not disposed? Of course not. But it's just such an easy and juicy headline. People can't resist.
Hey, William, sure. I want to follow up on that. Brian again here. The personality disorder aspect, and I fully understand what you're explaining, but I want to just maybe clarify even a little more for our listeners. This is a situation where we don't have an individual with like a disconnect from reality. It's that they have no moral compass or sense of guilt or shame for performing those acts, correct?
Well, especially since we're talking about school shootings, right? I'm not sure if you're meaning that or you're meaning kind of more.
Well, in general, with where you're talking about these criminals being having a personality disorder instead of a mental illness, and not that you don't have both, obviously, but that personality disorder.
Certainly somebody can have both, right? And personality disorder does not imply that it can't be severe. You can have people with personality disorders that are severely ill. Let's say antisocial personality disorder, right? Somebody who from the earliest time of their life has been steered toward being violent. Until violence is intrinsic to how they see the world. They see violence as necessary. They see it as the only thing that works. They see it as a perfectly viable interpersonal strategy. Well, that person is gravely ill and is a grave risk to the people around them. And just because they don't have a mental illness necessarily, but rather a personality disorder, doesn't mean they're not really troubled, and doesn't mean they can't really cause serious problems.
Got it.
Well, hey, William, I have kind of on the same lines, but maybe a little bit deeper. In the EDP class, you mentioned a few pretty horrible examples of violent individuals. Could you basically take this time to remind our listeners of what some individuals are capable of, and of course, that these individuals live among us? Can you give some examples of, unfortunately, the depravity that some of these of your research subjects have committed?
Well, I hate to get into the sort of titillation aspects of it, but the most important thing to realize is that the normal breaks, if you will, on behavior just don't exist with these sorts of people. Like here was another case that I just wrote about the other day. It was a case in Florida, and I know the poor Secretary of State in Florida must just hate that these stories come up, but Florida just does seem to generate a lot of them. It was a couple of guys recently just were found guilty in a case where they kidnapped a plastic surgeon and tortured him with a blowtorch by burning his hands with a blowtorch until he gave them the alarm codes to his house and the combination to the safe so they could go to his house and steal what turned out to be about $50,000. Now, they had gotten the information that this doctor had lots of cash in his home from one of their wives who was a patient of the doctor and who had heard that he was really rich and kept a lot of money laying around. So these are two people who've never met this man and yet have no problem kidnapping him and torturing him savagely. They almost burned both his hands off with a blowtorch just for some money. And by the way, they had planned to extort a much more substantial sum of money from his family, but they didn't wind up getting any money out of the extortion. Now, you would think that to torture someone nearly to death, there'd have to be some real animus, that you'd actually have to hate this person. But no, this was purely for money. So the normal breaks that would stop normal folks from doing the worst things we can imagine just aren't there. And that's really puzzling to normal folks because they can't see themselves doing anything even remotely like that, no matter what the motivation. And so to do it for just money is almost unthinkable. But what really concerns me about that is that people find it very hard, normal, ordinary, regular people find it very hard to concentrate on this sort of real depravity because it's just too awful. It's just too awful to contemplate. And so it's easy to sort of throw your hands up and say, well, there's no predicting what's going to go on. Well, that's not true at all. We have to look pretty closely at especially these really disturbing cases because we need to protect ourselves from them. And that is a real challenging task because we don't want to look at the darkest stuff out there.
Well, William, go ahead, Aaron.
No, you take it, buddy.
Well, William, you made a really good case just earlier in the interview that mental illness is not the problem, or at least it's not a true causation. But I think what you're hitting on, and by the way, I love what you post on your Instagram and your Facebook accounts. I regularly look at those and read through them because I know that that's part of our daily walk, or what should be is that analyzing and having those stories and those incidents in our mind, because again, that's going to help us have some form of response. And I'd like to hit on that a little bit later. But what I really think you're getting at is I think your term, the violent criminal actor, is that not what you're kind of hitting on now? If you can kind of expound upon that term.
Sure, and it's certainly not my term. The first person I ever heard using it was Skip Gokenauer of ATSA. But the violent criminal actor is a subset of criminals, right? For the vast majority of criminals, I dislike this term, but they would fall into the category of property criminals, right? When a property criminal, let's say somebody who steals your car stereo, right? Somebody who breaks into your house, breaks a window and grabs something expensive. Well, if that person's committing an act of violence, something's gone terribly wrong. That's not what they do. But for a violent criminal actor, the violence is what they do. The joke is that it's a feature, not a bug. They're certainly comfortable with violence, accustomed to it. They expect it to be part of their sort of daily activities and their criminal repertoire, if you will. And sometimes it is what they're there to do. They're not necessarily there to commit a property crime, but they're there to hurt somebody. And most violent criminal actors are diagnosable with antisocial personality disorder, meaning that they've been made to be the way they are by their upbringing. There are also folks who are more sociopathic and more psychopathic who don't need as much influence from the world, that they have a genetic predisposition to that kind of violence, and those folks are even more dangerous.
Well, and that kind of segues into, I believe that it was you that had kind of used the term, or maybe it's another borrowed term, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that studying these incidents and, reviewing video, I think I've heard you speak on that before as well, helps us have those mental parking spots. Wasn't it you that used that terminology?
Yeah, I always say, that you've got to have a parking spot in your head for what could happen, because it's so tempting to look the other way. I mean, when you see something really terrible, our first impulse is to say, well, that can't happen to me. Well, that's not true. It absolutely can happen to you. But moreover, there has to be a parking spot for what other people are capable of, because that's the only antidote to what's otherwise called projection. Projection is ascribing your values to the people around you, right? It sounds crazy when you say it out loud, but we all tend to do it. To say, well, I don't have to lock my car door because I would never steal someone's car. Well, it's not you that we're locking it against. It's people who don't share that value. But it's easy to project our values outward, to say, well, I'm a nice, decent, hardworking, God-fearing guy, so the next person to walk down the street will be just like me. Well, that's not the case, right? There are people walking around with very different upbringings, very different, moral and ethical structures, and their behavior is very, very different. And only when you concentrate on the fact and force yourself for those fleeting moments of recognition that there are people out there who think exactly the opposite, who have no problem justifying things that you could never justify. Those people are out there too. And we have to have a parking spot in our head for that knowledge, because, just like you at the mall, if there's no parking spot, the idea sort of circles your head and then runs out. And we've got to force ourselves to come to grips with the world is what it is, not what we would prefer it to be. And that takes much more work than you think. We don't like to think bad things. And in order to think bad things, it takes effort, because our natural inclination is to brush them off.
Well, and that's, I know it's not necessarily perfectly parallel to force on force training, just like we were hitting on earlier about ECQC. I can say that, I guess it's been this last one we hosted here in Olympia was my 7th time of taking that class. I remember the very first 2 ECQCs, at least the first one, I remembered very little of each scenario. And as time went on, I started remembering everything that took place, good, bad, or indifferent. Mm-hmm. Would you not say that this methodology of analyzing both video, analyzing these stories, is as crucial as force on force training is as well?
Well, it's a little bit different. That course, Extreme Close Quarter Concepts, put on by Craig Douglas. a lot of people might ask, why on earth have you taken a course 7 times? Because it's not really a training course. It's an audit. It's an audit of where you are. You're put in a scenario that's incredibly stressful. And the first time or a few times, the stress is so overwhelming that, as you said, nothing's recorded. You don't recall anything because you were just overwhelmed with stress and trying to survive. As you take it repeatedly and get inoculated to the stress, you function better under stress. And one of the forms of functional improvement is your memory of the events actually goes up. As you become better and better at managing that kind of stress, it isn't as overwhelming. And that is an incredibly important thing that only exposure can get you. All right, as you expose yourself to non-consensual outcomes and stress that can be absolutely overwhelming and unpredictable factors in the force-on-force training, you're actually changing your responses to stress. You're changing what we call your shock threshold. What is it exactly that startles you, that diminishes your function with arousal, with stress? And you can actually change how you react to stress over time, but it takes a lot of work. Your body doesn't know the difference between fake stress, unquote, let's say the stress that might be in games or scenarios, and real stress, unquote. Stress is just the body's response to demand placed on it. And it doesn't send a message, here's some stress, but don't worry that it's fake. No, the body responds as if everything were real. And you can see this in scenarios. There are cues all around that we're involved in an artificial environment. People are wearing helmets. People are carrying sim guns. We know that. But under the stress that can be drummed up in a well-run scenario, it doesn't feel fake. It doesn't feel like a game. It feels real. And the stress can be absolutely overwhelming to some folks, especially their first time around.
Well, William, I'm glad you brought that up because I'd heard you say that before, and it really changed my mindset towards, just basic stressors, competitive shooting stress, obviously this stress from ECQC, jiu-jitsu tournaments, so on and so forth. So I'm really glad you're putting that out, and the audience will benefit from hearing that from your expertise for sure. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, performance stress is really important to experience. Is a pistol match the same thing as someone trying to kill you? Of course not. But the stress it engenders is real. I mean, think about it. People will practice harder to do well in front of their friends and not be embarrassed than people will practice to save their lives. That notion of being humiliated is a very powerful motivator. And so the performance of performing any skill in public where you can be judged and scored, that itself is a kind of stress that is absolutely beneficial to make yourself undergo.
No, and I've been a huge proponent of competitive shooting. Not that it's obviously, if we want to really, open ourselves up to this other stuff, we should. But the mental maps and the training that you get doing that, you become your draw, your aim. You're getting that first shot on target all becomes much more automatic than it would be if you didn't do those things, because that's definitely, I think, a basis for where a lot of us get the basic skills when we go to these things like ECQC or one of those types of trainings. But I do want to ask.
Well, but sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but the point of practice is to make the thing that you're practicing more likely to occur.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the point of practice. Right. To draw a gun under pressure, to shoot under pressure, to make hits under pressure, to move around under pressure, to not drop the gun under pressure. Right. When you're practicing those things, you're making them more likely. And those are things that, presuming the worst day of your life does happen, and you have to draw that gun under the pressure of life-threatening stress. It would be nice if that wasn't the first time you've ever drawn it under pressure.
So we brought up, we poked a little fun at Craig, and we brought up the ECQC a couple times here. What started your relationship and then your involvement with the ShivWorks Collective?
It was interesting. I was a friend of the late trainer Paul Gomez. And he called me one afternoon and said, hey, there's this class going on this weekend. Do you want to come? And I was teaching that week, but I had time that weekend. And I said, sure, what's the class? He said, well, it doesn't really have a name yet. I said, oh, okay, who's teaching it? He said, he's a cop from Mississippi, but you wouldn't know him. I said, well, it doesn't have a name, and I don't know the guy teaching it. Why should I come? He said, it's great. He said he's got a real interesting take on what we called back in those days the 0 to 5 foot problem. So I took the class, and it actually turned out to be the first open enrollment version of what would become ECQC. It literally did not have a name at that point, and Craig had been teaching it to police officers, but it was the first open enrollment, meaning all civilian class of what would later come to be called ECQC. And I met Craig, and we just sort of hit it off. He's a very interesting, charming, charismatic, smart guy, and so we just sort of hit it off, and we always got along, and saw each other more often at training events, and just became friends that way. And the circle of people that I knew that knew Craig kind of gradually expanded. And if you think about the group we call the kind of ShivWorks collective, now it's all guys that we met that way, and we just share not just technical approaches, but philosophical approaches to the problem. And I think there are guys that have incredibly valuable things to say about the problem. And that's Cecil Birch of Immediate Action Combatives, right? Larry Lindemann of Point Driven Training, Chris Fry now out at Progressive Force Concepts and Modern Defensive Training Systems, Paul Sharp of Straight Blast Gym and Sharp Defense, Craig Douglas, obviously, and me. We've just sort of, aggregated together over time. We just we're good friends now, but we got started out as more kind of kindred spirits. And we just had a take on things that meshed and agreed and worked well together. And especially kind of this sense of inquiry that there's big things out there to be known, and we got to figure out what they are. And that's where the kind of motto came from: be honest about the problem and do the work. One of the biggest problems with not just martial arts training, but also gun training, knife training, etc., is that people aren't really honest about the problems that they face. And so that was one of the first things that kind of illuminated and bound the whole group together, was this notion of figuring out what's really going on and working hard to figure out what you can do about it, and getting away from some of the pitfalls of the models that came before.
Well, I'm nowhere near quite the student that Eric here is. He's been to quite a few more trainings than I have. I've just been to the most recent ECQC, but one of the things that I noticed right away, and of course in talking with the instructors and helpers that were there with Craig, the intensity with which they want to share the information. This is not show up, pay your money, wait, get 8 hours of training. He does this because he wants other people to have this information, and I love what you're sharing there about the reason that you're doing what you're doing is to learn more about the problem and how to solve the problem. And that's what I see with this, and that's what really drew me in once immediately. I had an idea of what was going to happen that weekend, but actually experiencing it was life-changing without a doubt. So, yeah. I appreciate. And
it's not a coincidence that when I look around at the sort of, ShivWorks collective members, Craig was a cop, and Larry was a cop, and Paul was a cop, and I was a cop, and Cecil has, very high level, world-class level competition experience. And Chris has been involved in this for, the better part of 30 years now. It's real. When you've seen, human brutality up close and personal, it's very real. And I say to people all the time, some people say, what's the thing you want students most to take away from the class? And I say, whatever it takes to make them less likely to get killed. The thing that they take away from the class, that's the most important one, is that they're in some way better than they were when they showed up, because it matters, right? It's not a simple, matter of doing better at your next competition. The threat is real and existential, and we want people to be less likely to die after having taken the class. That sounds, ridiculously, clear, but you'd be surprised how little that comes up in most regular classes, especially firearms classes. They tend to be about running the gun and about, beating your neighbor and performance standards, beating those. But, as Tom Givens says, we carry a gun because we might have to kill somebody with it. Not because I want to do my, exceed my PR on an El Presidente. I carry a gun, certainly not out of comfort, but because I might need it to kill somebody. And that kind of baseline groundedness, I think, is really, really important, but it's all too easy to let go.
As I get deeper in this industry and deeper into my training, it's become, and maybe this is something that I'll get over with time, but it's so frustrating to me how little, of course, gun owners, and this is axiomatic and even trite, but that so few gun owners, shooters, are even the least bit interested in, let's say, taking a class from the gentlemen, you guys that make up the ShivWorks Collective. I mean, you bring up your guys' names, and your average shooter and gun owner just looks at you like you're dumb, and it just amazes me, the lack of interest beyond doing anything but shooting a dang gun. And
well, they're not wrong. I mean, shooting is fun and should be fun. Mm-hmm. Believe me, I have no problem with, as long as we maintain the distinction between going shooting, which is a really fun thing to do. Taking part in the shooting sports is really fun to do. And training, right? Training is about, unless it's sport specific training, like if you want to be a high level pistol competitor and you take trainings that are specifically aimed at those performance disciplines, Steel Challenge or USPSA, that's great. And a lot of those guys, that are high level competitors, don't really think of a gun as a self-defense instrument. For them, it's a piece of sporting equipment, like a tennis racket or a golf club. And the notion that you'd carry a tennis racket around on a daily basis is just bizarre. And I get it. I'm certainly not judging those people. But for me, it's a tool. And tools have specific purposes. And I don't really take part in the shooting sports. I have, but that's not what motivates me. But I have seen people hurt badly by violent criminals, and that's not something I'm going to take part in uncontested. That I'm not going to be subject to without at least getting a vote.
Well, hey, on that training aspect, what is your current deep dive in training these days?
Strangely enough, I've been intrigued by the impact of speech. And it sounds really weird, but I've been very interested in how con men use speech to manipulate, and sort of been deep diving into that, the weird linguistics of it and all that, and the kind of manipulation strategies using just speech. It's kind of a rabbit hole, and the deeper you go, I don't know that anything will come out of it in terms of work product, like would I ever be presenting on it myself. But I've just found it fascinating. Because seeing people that are good talkers, unquote, and looking at the effect that has on other people has really caught my interest lately.
No, that's a great subject, actually, because social engineering, to put a name on it, has always interested me. And having worked a long time in the career of sales, I definitely handle people differently than someone who is introverted and doesn't want to talk to anyone. I have to be outgoing as my job, but obviously that's a personality trait that I had that drew me to this type of work. But I definitely get information or favors from vendors or customers that other people would not because of how I handle them. So it is interesting to watch that occur.
Yeah, it's, and I wish that it could be 100% taught, because one of the things that Craig uses the term verbal agility. I always thought of it more as kind of verbal dexterity, but people that talk well have an extra arrow in the quiver. And you can see it sometimes in force-on-force scenarios, that there are advantages to the good talker that the less dexterous talker just doesn't have available to him. And sometimes it can change the course of a scenario. One of the hardest things for people to do is what we call break the frame. Say something so odd and so out of place that the person, let's say that they are a criminal offender and they're running some sort of game, that they'll sort of not know how to compute what you said. That's a really hard thing for most people to do. I have a friend who has a little technique that he uses on panhandlers, which I've actually watched it work, and it's almost comical, the effect. No matter what the panhandler asks for, a cigarette, a quarter, the time, anything like that. My friend says, with incredibly cheerful affect, right? Bright, smiling, kind of beaming face, he says quite loudly, "No, but thank you so much." And I've actually seen panhandlers literally stop in their tracks, and you can see them questioning, wait, did I say something wrong? Because he acts as if they've offered him something rather than asking him something. And it's so out of the framework of what they expect the response to be that you can almost hear their mouths snap shut. They just sort of, they don't know how to compute. And that's a kind of a verbal dexterity that people either seem to have or not. I think you can always get better at it, but I think that the people who are truly kind of high-level practitioners, it's a gift that they've honed, but still it's a gift. I think everybody can get better at that one particular skill, but the really high levels, I think, are really only available to the people that got that gift.
Well, William, that's a great response, and it kind of, again, I hate to overuse the word, segues into my next question, which I'm not sure why I didn't put two and two together that you were friends with Paul Gomez. That is, I was a friend of his as well. We trained together a few times, but I don't think that the training community realizes how much Paul contributed to, what we have now. All of us in under the tutelage of the collective, you guys and Chivalrous Collective. That was Paul that essentially started that. Would you not agree?
Well, I think
or brought it to birth. I should say. Sorry.
Well, Paul's a great connector, of other people. He would love to introduce people, and especially if that connection came to fruition in some way. Paul was I used to tease him that he was the hard drive of the industry, because it seemed like he just remembered so much about so many different things and was interested by so many different things that it was easy for him to connect people. And moreover, he had a joy in learning. One of the things that you could see it on his face was when he heard something he had never heard before. I mean, he loved it. He actually just sort of savored it. and in a way, that love of knowledge, that joy in learning, and his ability to connect people is what I'll remember the most. I can't tell you how many people I've known, who also knew Paul, right? That it was just an odd connection. And he loved to bring people together. And I think that's the thing that, the industry itself is a whole bunch of silos. And Paul was just sort of the opposite of that. I mean, he was a real connector, and we could do with some more of those for sure.
Absolutely. And that will bring me to the second part of that kind of discussion is I know that you do lectures at some big conferences, of course, Range Master, Tactical Conference. I know you've done Tactical Responses Alumni Weekend. I cannot believe I've not been to an Alumni Weekend after, training there in the past. And also Polypalooza. Craig will state that managing unknown contacts is the most important portion of ECQC. I honestly agree. When you go to these conferences and you provide these lectures, can you describe, if you could only do one lecture, what would it be on and why?
That's a tough one. But there's a lot I think about target selection, what used to be called victim selection. That's important. But I'd have to say that I think the piece I do on the developmental psychology of criminal offenders is important because it's very hard for normal folks to grasp how different the life, the background, and the resulting ways of thinking and ways of being are for dangerous, violent criminals. They're so different that it's almost hard to imagine how different they are. And that talk gives me the time to really get across on a pretty granular level how different these people are and how much your thinking has to change to accommodate the realities that they can create. I think, the fact that talk is, a good 3 hours long is necessary because otherwise it's too easy to say, yeah, violent criminals are different, and yeah, I'll be careful. But the breadth of material that we go through and the examples that we go through gets it across in a way that I don't really think can be shortcut. Well, it just occurred to me that it could be shortcut by being victimized, but we don't want that, right? That's the far too painful way and far too costly way to learn those lessons. And short of that, I think it takes quite a bit of intense concentration to get across how much our mindset needs to change.
Well, great answer, William. And quite frankly, although I've not been able to attend that lecture, I can't wait. But I've had some knowledge of the shows that you've been on and some of Aaron's notes. So I expected, in all honesty, something around those lines. So that was a great answer. So with that said, at some point, maybe we can have you back on that we can get into that granular discussion. Is that okay?
Oh, I'd love to come back.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Maybe that can be the next show, would just simply be to get into those details. So sure. As far as the way the show's gone, we're kind of closing in on time. What I'd kind of like to do now is let Aaron change and shift the discussion to a lighter note. Aaron, what you got?
Yeah, sure. Sounds good. Well, William, like we talked about before the show, there's all these great shows and there's great guests and a lot of these guests talk about the same kind of stuff, which we love, but we've tried to add some funner, more personal aspects to the shows. Now, my first question along these lines would be, besides martial arts, shooting, and I'm talking even reading, what does the regular Doc Aprill enjoy to do? Oh,
I'm a huge fan of the arts. live music, film. I'm a big live theater fan. It seems to me a kind of an art form that's dying away, but a good play I'm a big fan of. But kind of on a daily, in terms of hobby basis, I'm an old house person. I own an old house, and I'm constantly pecking away on renovating it, though I have this feeling that I'm going to finish it the day before I die. So, being an old house person, you have to learn a bunch of different kinds of things. And so that occupies a lot of my time.
Well, that's great. Now, a lot of our listeners know I've mentioned several times that I'm a musician also. And so my favorite question to ask here on the show is, what are your top 5 favorite musicians and or artists, or, whichever direction you want to take that. Absolutely no judgments here. We're just music lovers ourselves.
Well, it's strange, but the first 3 that occurred to me, 2 of them are dead. It's just really sad. It just dawned on me. I'm a huge fan of Sharon Jones and the Dap Kings. Great, modern, funk from the 70s that never died. And poor Sharon Jones just passed away. And I'm an enormous Prince fan. I actually met him when I was in high school back in the Dirty Mind days. I was an enormous Prince fan. Wow. I love the guitarist Paco Peña. There's also a local guitarist named John Fole, who I'm a huge fan of. But when you think about your musical taste, it's kind of schizophrenic. Making up lists like this, there's just nothing to connect them, and it seems very bizarre. As soon as the words came out of my mouth, I was like, "There's no connecting the two." Those artists, but also, it was a huge Stevie Ray Vaughan fan. Great Texas rocker. But wow, this has turned into like a list of my favorite dead musicians. I didn't mean it to, but a whole variety of musical tastes.
Well, that's all right. Of course, some of them become bigger legends after they've gone on. I would maybe even say Stevie Ray Vaughan is one of those people. He was definitely appreciated. But when I remember I was in high school when he died, and after that, lots of people became huge fans of his and went back into his catalog. But of course, an amazing musician. There's a handful of really good Texas musicians for sure.
But I have to say, on kind of it's great, but it's also kind of gross. Stevie Ray Vaughan got Sweat on Me. I actually saw him in a concert. It's just an absolutely tiny venue here in New Orleans. And if you ever saw Stevie Ray Vaughan play live, he sweat like a fire hydrant. It was just really kind of extraordinary. He would literally be dripping sweat. And we were so close to the stage that he was jumping around, and putting the guitar behind his head and behind his back. I got spattered with Stevie Ray Vaughan sweat. And I'm equally thrilled and completely grossed out by that.
Wow. That's an amazing story. See, that's what we're getting at. Hopefully maybe that's one of the first times you've told that story on the air about,
that's the very first time I've ever told that story.
That's great.
And likely to laugh.
And Aaron, if I can interject, you may have been about to say this, but Mike Brown responded with Prince as well, William.
How interesting.
Well, I think it would be illegal if someone was not a Prince fan, if you just ask me.
But especially early Prince, when he played kind of pre-1999, when he played all his own instruments and everything like that. That was when I got into it. And it was just a incredibly infectious and sort of raw kind of music. And it was great, of course, to follow his later career, but I always have a soft spot for that incredibly early works.
Good deal. Well, I'll tell you what, we are definitely reaching the end of the show, and let me tell you, it's been great having you on, and we were all really excited to have you here, and I'll tell you, we look forward to having you back on, and I look forward to getting some training from you again. I'm seriously the training and the EDP class. Everybody that can take that should go take that, because it is an amazing class. One of the things that when I first showed up, I had just taken ECQC maybe a few months before it for my first time. And, Eric got me addicted on that stuff, and I've taken it 3 times now too. But when I got there, I was like, man, I did not know what to expect. And Craig said, oh, you thought you were going to come in here and get punched in the face again? So I guess I can just encourage some listeners that, if you're a little bit reticent to roll around on the ground doing jiu-jitsu and shooting each other with Sims, you can just go to a class like that and experience some of the scenario-based stuff without being as intense as ECQC.
Yeah. The goal is to put as much stress on you as we can, but in a very particular way. Mm-hmm. Not as much as having some guy jump on you and try to beat your head in, but different kinds of stress.
It's definitely stressful. It's definitely stressful. If people, they are a little bit nervous about the other fighting stuff, that it's a little less physical, but definitely, I would say yes, more stressful. I agree about that. But now, of course, we need to ask you one more thing, William. Why don't you let the audience know where they can find you and, upcoming training events, etc.?
Well, I think the best place to start is actually on Instagram under Aprill, Aprill Risk Consulting, because it's I try to put out between 5 and 7 posts a week, little nuggets, things from news and events around the country that strike me as interesting and illuminating. It's a good entree to how I think about things, and then on from there you can go to Facebook, and I publish most of the same stuff, and find out about courses and things like that. We're all over the country, of course. I'll be in Michigan this coming week, and then in Colorado the week after. So around the country pretty often.
Awesome. Now, real quick, when is the next Establishing Dominance Paradigm class?
It is, I believe, let me see.
Sorry to put you on the spot there.
No, not at all. January 10th, 11th, and 12th in Tennessee. But the one thing about that class is it sells out quickly. I believe it sold out in 5 hours. So when we open up a date, it usually sells out very shortly after we post a date. So it's been sold out for almost a year. But if you go through the rangemaster.com website, Tom is the kind of overseer of the registrations and things. You can always check in and see if there's a cancellation or a last minute opening, or for illness or some kind of logistical problem, somebody can't come. It's possible, we don't want to hold your breath, but it's possible that a slot may open up.
Well, that's awesome. It kind of lets me have a badge of honor for being able to have taken it.
Yeah, you got it. That's a very limited. That's a very limited enrollment class, and we only offer it once a year. Getting the 3 of us to have an open weekend in our schedules is pretty hard, and we, that's a class that we really enjoy putting on. Not to, reveal any secrets, but we're learning from watching the students process the material. We're learning from that too, and so it's very valuable all around, I think.
Great, William. Well, I think we can go ahead and let you go. You've given us a lot of your time, and again, we just really appreciate it. This is a blast for us. You're someone we respect greatly and have been following you for years, and to have you on our show, this new endeavor that we have over the last 6 months or so, we're just honored and just want to thank you for it.
No, thank you very much for having me on. I'd love to come back.
Good deal. Well, if we don't have anything else to say on over there in Washington, I think we're going to go ahead and let William go.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Take care, William. Thanks a lot.
Thank you again.
Hey guys, that was an excellent interview. I'll tell you what, I'm still blown away with this show that we've put together and the partnership we have, the three of us. You know, I'm a huge podcast junkie. I have been for the past 5 or 6 years. And I'll tell you what, anytime that I see one of my podcasts come up and I see William Aprill in the title, I mean, I exclaim something out loud for sure. I mean, I'm pretty excited about it. And to have him on our own show, I mean, was just amazing to me. Just real excited. And I hope everybody likes it as much as we do. How about you guys?
Oh, absolutely, man. I was about to cut you off and jump in and just get on your bandwagon because that was a really cool interview. And I look forward to, spending some more time with him and having him back on the show and just learning more of what he has to offer.
Yeah, Aaron, sorry about that, buddy. He is the preeminent expert on both the criminal mind and the defender's mind. So, I mean, it was great to have him on the show.
Well, the fun thing is for me, right, is that I spent, a whole weekend with him and Tom Givens and Craig Douglas at the Establishing Dominance Paradigm class that we talked about during the interview. And just on a personal note, William is an extremely gracious and nice person. I mean, he was always real encouraging. And when some instructors I've been under and can be a little bit gruff, but I mean, he was just really helpful and a lot of fun to have around. So that was a great experience. So
very cool.
Well, it's accountability time. Do you guys want me to roll on with it?
Oh yeah, brother. Tell us about your week.
Well, let me let it all out here. So for my exercise, I'll tell you, it was limited to my jiu-jitsu session this last week. Now, but the fun part of it was that I got to work out with my son, Josh. You guys in the audience might remember he was included in our ECQC ARR show. Again, I had not worked with him in a while on the mats, and man, he's just gotten even better and better. And one of the things that really stood out to me is that, so jiu-jitsu, right, is all about using leverage, and of course, gravity is one of the things most people don't think about, that gravity is on your side in jiu-jitsu, right, guys?
Absolutely.
Well, I'll tell you, he's 70 pounds lighter than me. And this wasn't a joke. His side control was so good, I could not get out from under him. So, again, just real proud of him. Now, on to my dry fire. I definitely, again, I've been really good about doing it every day, but my schedule's been so crazy. I've only been getting in a couple of minutes a day, usually a couple of sessions for a minute. But again, I'm sticking to that. And part of the reason why I can't do it for very long is because I'm practicing on gripping the heck out of my gun, and that wears me out. But so yeah, I'm adjusting to a new gig schedule for this season, and I'm just trying to figure out how I'm going to get everything stuck in the way I want to. Now, Brian, don't you make fun of me for my Heine sights now. One thing that
he said Heine.
Yes, Heine. I actually was having a hard time finding the exact sights that I wanted. So, and then this bright idea came up where I would just go ahead and get a sight from another company, a front sight, to go with my straight 8 Pro. What's it called? The Slant Pro. Man, I really prefer the uncluttered, single dot in the back. But I needed a brighter front sight, so I went ahead and got the AmeriGlow iDot Pro in orange, and it's really sticking out, and I'm digging that quite a bit. Last weekend, I went ahead and shot an IDPA match, and this was the first time I shot 2 guns, and I'll tell you what, that's a great way to spend a match. Why not get 2 matches done in one day, right?
Man, that's awesome.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I shot my carry pistol, my 19, in the concealed carry pistol division, and then I shot my tried and true 17 in the ESP division. The funny thing was that I did best with my concealed carry pistol, so that's kind of cool.
Well, Aaron, did you shoot your concealed carry second or first?
I shot it second, but I'll tell you one thing. I also goofed up something pretty bad in my ESP division shooting, but yeah, it's sometimes I do shoot my 19 better. It's really wild. Mike Brown feels that a lot of the times he shoots his 19 better too. Just an interesting side note there. Now, this is the part that I'm a little bit embarrassed about, guys. Of course, I did my weekly range trip, but I was in a hurry, and I simply just ran through about 160 rounds on steel, and then I just realized when I was on my way here that I forgot to do the drill.
Boo.
Yeah, can you guys believe that?
Oh man,
I'm gonna have to catch up. Yeah, I'm gonna have to catch up on that, but I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys have on it. Hey, Brian, you about ready to roll with your accountability?
Yeah. So we'll get to it later, but I shot the drill. So just to start off, but that's hey, I didn't shoot it last week, so that's and it like I've always said, keeping after what we're doing and doing. You don't have to do more than last week. You have to do what you can get done in a week. And, last week was a really heavy workout week for me, which that's more common that I get heavy workout weeks. And I got 4 morning CrossFits in, which is more than I typically do. And I got 2 jiu-jitsu sessions in because the week before I didn't get any. So I was really excited to get those in. And again, still having some scheduling issues. I can't get that 3rd jiu-jitsu class in 1 week. It's like I'm really going to try to get it though, because I want to get my class numbers up. I really want to be in front of Professor Will Moore. I'm after them stripes, man. I want them. But so anyway, 6 really aggressive workout sessions, and also did some physical work around the house, which, man, I would count that as a workout because boy, I was moving some big stuff. A few thousand pounds of equipment got moved several times, so that doesn't not count. But a little bit of dry fire. I got 2 sessions in anyway, and they were short, but it's more than none. And on the drill, which was the fast drill, again, there was no clock on this week, but wouldn't you figure? Here's my advice: if you haven't done it and you're going to do it, take your time, because that was the whole point, was to take your time and make the shots count. And guess what this guy did? He tried to push himself right out the gate. And I had 2 shots. I had one shot off the 3x5 card and 1 shot off the A zone. And, I was a little irritated with myself because I let myself get out of hand. I started popping those shots off and going a little too fast. And Eric's going to give us a new description this week, but when I go out this week to shoot it, I'm going to start by doing that at a extremely slow cadence and placing each and every shot where I want it to go, instead of letting myself get all worked up and pulling the trigger fast, which is exactly what I did. And, if they're not going where I intended them, then there's no point in doing that. So anyway, but that's what I got done for the week. So what about you, Eric?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Brian. It was a pretty interesting week for me. I have to admit I had no early morning workouts. However, I had 2 evening strength and conditioning workouts. I had to be at work early all through the week, so that disabled me from being able to get up as early as I would have liked to get the workouts in, that is. So still got those 2 done. I dry fired actually every day. I really focused on my shooting this last week. So we got all my dry fire sessions in. I went to one formal jiu-jitsu class at Jiu-Jitsu Dynamics, and then I had a private session with one of my good friends who's a purple belt. I always love, if it's been hard for me to fit a workout in, I can always fit in a private session with him. So, and kind of the big thing for me this week was I shot IDPA. I hadn't shot IDPA in months and months because my schedule always seems to have me on the road when there's a match. So I was really looking forward to it this last weekend. And I was also looking forward to reporting on my new sites that Brian recommended, the Dawsons. And man, those things are awesome. I love them. Thanks a lot for that suggestion, Brian. Actually had a decent match. I did have one bad train wreck, I will admit, but overall I shot pretty consistent. And I'll kind of hit on, something that, we're all always mentioning, hey, if I only got 2 dry fire sessions in this week. But I was listening to John Hearn on a podcast, and I love this term, is recency. And recency in practice is way more important than quantity some time ago. So if it's just a 2-minute dry fire session 2 days ago is way better than 60, 70 rounds at the range 2 months, or let me put a higher number on that, 200 rounds. So just something to think about. So I did do the drill of the week, shot it clean, but I took my time, big time. I really had to ease off the gas pedal. So the cool part about the fast drill is we're going to go ahead and do this 2 more weeks in a row. The reason why I want to do it 2 weeks in a row is actually I want to give everybody a chance to have 2 weeks of putting a little bit of gas on, but easing the gas on this week. And so as a reminder, this is the Todd Green Fast Drill. That stands for Fundamentals, Accuracy, and Speed Test. It's done at 7 yards, 2 rounds in your first magazine, and at least 4 rounds in your magazine on your belt. The target is a 3x5 index card stapled to the head zone and the 8-inch circle -0 zone or A zone. So the start position is from concealment, and on the buzzer you will draw and fire 2 rounds into the head, the card itself. You'll come to slide lock reload, and then dump the 4 other rounds into the chest, into the 8-inch circle. So that's it, just 6 rounds, and it's a heck of a test. So I really enjoy this, and I think we're going to have some fun over the next couple of weeks of turning the gas on. So let me go ahead and give you guys the times that you would want to aim for. But again, as I stated, we want to kind of just ease into it. So novice is 10 or plus seconds or more than 10 seconds. Less than 10 seconds is intermediate. Less than 7 seconds is advanced. And less than 5 is expert. Now, I understand that you have to shoot this in a class, but if you shoot it twice at advanced or expert, you make the list and you get a coin at expert.
Yeah, hey guys, I wanted to kind of circle back to something that Eric said about his match, kind of having a train wreck. The more I compete, the more enamored I am with how important competition is. It's, the 3 of us have shot a lot of matches, over the past, 20 years. For me, and I did take a hiatus for a while, but I've been shooting a lot of matches in the last few years, and I tell you, no matter how many times you do it, there's just this tendency to rush. There's this tendency to lose your train of thought, and man, the more you do it, the better you're going to get at it. But at the same time, you see the best shooters still mess it up. I mean, what do you guys think?
I can't agree more, Aaron. And let's just really, drive home why we're competing. Of course, we're competing for fun. It's a lot of fun. I mean, IDPA, USPSA, or the types of matches like I shoot with Brian here at some local matches, they're a lot of fun. But more importantly, is you're under pressure. You're under some novel stress that, as I think we kind of hit on in the interview with William, is your body, your mind doesn't know the difference between faux stress and real stress, and it helps you with those mental maps and dealing with that pressure. And so we know that it's extremely valuable. So I'm real glad to have been able to do it because, again, like I said, I don't get to do it as often. But Brian, what are your thoughts on it, buddy?
Well, there's one thing that I can tell you for sure, and I don't know what this phenomenon is, but if I've got a plan, it exits my head the moment that timer goes off. Mm-hmm. And I that's not new. I didn't make that up. You've heard that elsewhere as well. But the truth of the matter is, when that timer goes off, all of a sudden I'm worried about beating the guy that was ahead of me or the guy that I watched shoot it clean. And what I got to remember, and a lot of the matches, some of the shooting that I do is slow pace, single fire. And I got to remember the only thing that's important in the moment is me and the target I'm aimed at. Now, if I try to remember the entire course of fire in that moment, that's not going to work. It needs to almost, you obviously you're going to do your walkthroughs. I highly, highly recommend shooting the stage in your head before you do it.
Definitely.
Because the times that I actually remember to do it, and usually I'm halfway through the stage and I realize that I hadn't, and that's stuff I don't need to be thinking about either, but really keeping your head clear of that stuff and just processing it, because the same thing is, like Eric's talking about the novel stress, going through that in your brain, the same thing, you're actually setting yourself up for success to do that.
Yeah, Brian, if I can double down on what you said, back when I was decently competitive, back in the late 2000s or early 2000s, pardon me, Mike would have me rehearse, try to shoot mid-pack if you can. That doesn't always work out because of the way they shuffle the names. But if you can rehearse, I think the magic number Mike uses now is 10 times in your head, slow the first few, medium speed the next few, and then try to shoot it match speed, visualizing you doing it correctly. And whenever I get that chance to rehearse it a bunch of times in my mind, I always do that much better. Aaron, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll tell you that this last weekend, I definitely worked on a lot of visualization. Now, I kind of have to back up and to those in our audience that have not gotten into competition, and let's even say this to people in the audience that think that competition is a bad thing. Well, and they're saying, well, you're just gaming it, right, by going through the stages in your head. Well, the point is that it is a game, but that does not take away the fact that your shooting must be subconscious. You can only really focus on the string of fire, and you're shooting 18 rounds or whatever. It's you going through the visualization is simply a mental exercise that helps you. It sharpens your mind, right?
What you were saying about the, folks saying, well, you're gaming it. Well, the visualization piece doesn't just help us, in my opinion, in the match itself. It helps us with the shooting process itself. So the more I get the opportunity to visualize and see myself doing things perfectly, it's repetition that I executed. So I think that's something that's lost on those that might consider competition as being a game. But yeah, I mean, just flat out, it's more practice.
The thing with me when I get to the line. Maybe it's subconscious, but I do not consciously think about the people around me, and I really don't care about beating other people there. But for some reason, even the pressure that I put on myself, it's what pushes me over the edge to shoot faster than I really need to, and forget about, procedural issues in the match. But I mean, it's just eminently important to compete. I'm glad I'm getting to do it a lot more often.
Oh yeah, I need to get back into it, and I definitely have had some life issues that have pulled me away from competition recently, and I'm definitely going to be moving back in a direction to try to get to some of the local club matches and stuff. I've got one of the clubs here every Tuesday night. They run something, and it's different each week of the month, and I can choose to hit the same week and, do the same type of shooting each time, or I can mix it up and do different stuff. But even going shooting speed steel, I mean, you're engaging targets at speed under, a clock. It's absolutely positively beneficial in my opinion, and it's going to make you a better shooter. It's going to make you understand how you react when you're in that kind of a push and when you're under that kind of commitment to making the shots. So it's a great feeling. You don't have to win, but it's a great feeling just to go out there and shoot it clean. I've been much prouder of some of my performances that were way subpar for time, but they were absolutely clean. So, if is there anything else you guys want to add to that?
Man, I think we're good to go. That good topic, guys. Great interview with William, and as always, wonderful getting together and talking with you guys. That's why we do it. We just like to talk.
Absolutely, and I will. I've hit this before, and I'll hit it again. Go to your local club. Go to your local range. There are people there that will help you shoot. There are matches there that you don't have to be a member or pay a due to shoot in. All you got to do is pay a $5 or $10 match fee. There's so much of that stuff that's available, and it's another level of training that you get to do. So anyhow, well, thank you all for sticking around this long. That was a great show, and great work, you guys. Good work on the accountability and staying busy. So until next week, guys, we'll talk to you later.
Take care, Brian. Take care, Aaron.
See you guys.